Welcome to a very special edition of our show. I'm Ron James, and I'm here with Elizabeth Martina Bishop. Elizabeth has written several volumes of poetry in short prose, as well as achieving a PhD, teaching writing, and having an overall exciting life. Elizabeth, thank you for being here to talk to us.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for saying I've had an exciting life. Others might find it extremely mundane and boring.
Well, I mean, your body of work, which I have a little stash of books down here, My Feet Talk to the Road, and this one's a collection of prose, right? Short stories?
Probably the only short story collection I have.
Now, these are in no particular order, so tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Well, I think something that's important about the book, if you look at the cover, it looks like two people in Sedona.
It is two people.
Well, we had actually arrived in Sedona and been there 24 hours, and we were dropped in a parking lot. That's actually a picture of a parking lot in Sedona.
Oh, that's right. Is this the Bell Rock parking lot?
That's right.
Oh, okay, sure.
And so I felt that I needed to write this book afterward about Gardenia's Cafe. And Gardenia was actually a wonderful psychic that I knew in Boston who has since passed, and she inspired me. I really have never met a psychic like her. She just sort of shuffled into the Boston tea room and delivered all kinds of prognostications. And I said, wow, what if a book was written about her and the people that come into her tea room? And that's how the book began.
We have another one here, Leaping into the Unknown.
Yes, and that book was written about after the passing of my mother and how she saw the near-death experience in the afterlife. And the picture of me leaping into the unknown is, I was very happy because I just graduated from Sarah Lawrence College, and I knew that I didn't have to study anymore, at least not then.
You know, it's a beautiful picture, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Mm-hmm. So here's one that's kind of a fun title, Shaman's Lunchtime Cafe. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Yeah, I was telling you previously in our little conversation that Shaman's Lunchtime Cafe was really written for all those people who are really addicted to shamanism, and they want to be shamans, and they take courses coming home to shamanism. And so I thought, again, what if we had a convention of shamans who were sitting in a cafe and just discussing what it was like to really be a shaman poet? So it's a tongue-in-cheek rendition of my work, but that's a very recent book. That's written really almost last month.
So when we talk about shamanism, especially in a place like Sedona, there's a lot of people that claim to be shamans. Do you think that the real truth of what a shaman is and was has been lost in the modern interpretation?
Well, I am taking a course right now in the history of religions, and shamanism does not come into that course, but in a way it's always there because of Old Arabi and New Arabi and New Norse and Old Norse. Every language and every culture seems to have a past and then a future, a language that's embedded in modern times and more contemporary issues. So, yeah, I think shamanism is somewhere, but where to find it?
So you're kind of poking fun at the whole shamanistic way in this book.
Someone once told me poets should never poke fun at anyone because then they would imitate Aristophanes and the Greek poets who got in big trouble for poking fun at very serious philosophers.
Oh, and that's a rule you follow.
I really love Aristophanes and those people that wrote those plays, and I really feel like a playwright most of all. I think all my poems are the beginning of a play.
You know, it's interesting in hearing you talk about in hearing you read some of your poems that you don't take yourself too seriously, even though the prose is beautiful and there's some amazing turns of a phrase. Talk a little bit about the philosophy that you approach your poetry with.
I think that's really a hard word for me because I said to you that I really love Greek philosophy, and I've been taking new courses in feminism that say, do not love the Greek philosophers, understand they have abandoned the goddess religion. So I used to call myself a hobo goddess, and me and my partner would go around to all the different fairs and say, we're here, the hobo goddesses have arrived. And there is something to that. I think humor is the one healing hope for society's ills.
So we have a beachside motel.
Yeah, that was
Tell us a little bit about this one.
Oh, that was our trip to Dover. And we went into an extraordinary hotel where they were doing all kinds of deep sea diving and archaeological research of the erosion of the soil in Dover. And that is about our trip to Dover. It's a pretty interesting book.
Did you write the whole book during that trip, or did
Yes.
you write it in retrospect?
Well, when you ask me, you know, Ron, if you ask me when did I write the book, I write about 2 or 3 poems every day. So it's kind of like if I'm somewhere for a month, then I write a month's worth of poems, and that goes into the next volume.
That's very interesting. Now, this one, honoring the elders.
Well, I was very, very happily asked by the Navajo to teach them, and they taught me. I couldn't teach them anything. And that's how that book came about, that I really wanted to honor the people that were trusting of me to come and teach them. But I learned everything from, it was the other way around, let me assure you.
So the stack of books is starting to dwindle, but this isn't even your entire body of work. How many books have you written?
I think in the last 3 years, 45 books.
45 books, and they're all full published books just like this?
They're like that.
And this is meditation, and you read a poem about the blue heron.
Yes, I did, Ron. I talked about the time I went shopping and the blue heron came and sat on the hood of my car, and while I unloaded all the groceries, it wouldn't leave. It didn't leave till I went in my house.
And the blue heron never left you,
He never left.
and now he's famous. The blue heron's going to get an agent and expect a cut of the royalties. This is another one that you read from, Camille's Return.
Yes, and that one is based on a painting of an Apache woman in 1860s by a portrait painter named Amy Stein.
And then here's another one, Shaman Dreaming. Tell us about this. This is a pretty thick book. Is this all prose or poetry or
These
both?
are short stories.
Short stories?
Yes, and they're about mostly written in Boulder.
Now, you've got some really interesting titles. So do you pretty much stick to a theme within the book?
And that's funny you should ask me that. When I first started to write, I had book titles. And while most people are counting sheep at night, I was counting book titles. So I'd come up with a book title like that, and I'd come up with another book title and another. And then I would just choose one to write into, so to speak. But if I didn't get the title of the book, I couldn't write the first poem.
That's interesting. So you kind of come up with a title and then the energy that has inside of it, and that shapes the work that you write.
Exactly.
To fill the pages.
You got it.
I don't think I'd really admit that to too many people, but it's. And speaking of cool titles, you've got 2, Stonehenge Blues 1 and 2. And what's the theme of these? And where did you get the idea for the title for this?
Well, what happened was
Here's one.
I was on a trip to England, and I wanted to see Stonehenge because I'd heard about the fact that it was a very important Druidic site, and people surround that site and try to figure out what it meant in the past. So I went there, and I couldn't get into it. They'd roped it off.
Right. Was
And
that right when they did it, that you
yes.
were there? Okay,
And
because it
so-
used to be open. People
right.
could go and
Yeah.
touch the rocks and meditate and everything else.
Right. So because I couldn't get to the actual stones there, I decided that I better write a book about it. And actually, Stonehenge Blues is a coming-of-age story.
You brought a CD with some really awesome poetry, and we had to narrow it down. Can we play it?
Absolutely, Ron. Ghost Portrait. Pertaining to the afterlife, people are looking for definite proof these days. They want orbs, perfumed circus barkers, crystalline scarves, crystal balls, religious relics, and even Madonna statues. Do you think we might all go up in smoke? Is that what you think, Nikolai? Last night, with my hair falling over my shoulders in front of a mirror, I thought I heard you calling me through the ethers of the glass. The day before, my sister even left an offering of milk on the back porch. It was then, Nikolai, I felt the touch of your hand on my cheek. if my great-grandmother really knew the Tsar, I'm not sure that was relevant to any of us. Are you? Bordered by woods, inhabited by wolverines. Do you know anything of our homestead in Slovenia? Nikolai, we simply cannot have a divorce. So please, listen to what I have to say. When we forget to sweep the floors of the house thoroughly after a death, ghosts of winter come to assail us with blue knuckles of frost. Frost fur. Is that what they call it in the Hudson Bay region? If lovingly tendered, embered flames of hearth are hushed and snuffed out, in death's aftermath, what are we about? When bodies are strapped to our skin, you know, beggared desires are so very rarely fulfilled, not with the skill of an ice fisherman, for sure. When knotted threads fall from your wrists, did you know, Nikolai, all karma vanishes, and all dreams, and footprints of foxes in the snow? Are the blurred footprints of ancestors relevant to your intent, Nikolai? Between your final breaths, would you dare to topple golden cloud altars bursting before mountains already anchored in the bliss of newly fallen snow on pine? In the next room of the dream, Nikolai, I think I hear you whistling through the pores of my skin. If you are nowhere to be found, what does this really mean? Do horses signify something more dangerous than you riding in my dream? Today, when I broke off a tooth on a golden-rimmed cup from Jerusalem, I wondered what would happen next. True, we've been married a long time, Nikolai. Too long. In fact, your polished Cossack boots refuse to walk you towards the grave or the garden. The fact that death outlives most of us seems to interest you only a little. Cremation is to take place, I read on a placard on the barn, next Wednesday. Nobody is perfect. I recall how you wept while I held the dog's back. I don't want to create unnecessary anxiety, not for the next generation. That was my mistake, Nikolai, my mistake, my passionate mistake on your account, Nikolai. Don't wake up, don't wake up. Now that you have departed, I promise I will pay more attention. The hinges of the crescent moon seem full of promises, obstacles, and primroses. Don't deny it. You were an excellent gardener. Nikolai, our marriage was built on a platform of lilies, nasturtium, honeysuckle, trumpet vine. In short, it was full of lies. Vibrations rise, generations, ancestors rise and fall. Were you ever there for me, Nikolai? Were you ever there for me, even when I sung in the morning and brushed my hair. Only the one traveling, the traveler, knows when he has arrived. That Sunday when you returned from the Crimean coast before your death, all you did was play chopsticks on the piano. Really? Really? You never played Chopin? Not even a mazurka, a polonaise? Not even anything that would move my heart. I already saw the stones turn in the garden, the small ibex on the pond, reflecting what of passion had surely left. Sorrow remained on my broken tongue. I was never jealous, Nikolai. Let hell warm the little fires of our blue-embered knuckles of the past. Rich is the man who has no debts to pay, as far as love goes. In Slovenia, everyone is known to have left this world wrapped in a new linen cloth, blessed by a monk. Ravens must have had their way with you, Nikolai, for you were tied in a sitting position. Watch them peck the rice that is floating in the river of breath. Their arrival signifies the unseen body's departure. What is left of breath, frost, marriage, departure? What is left of love, Nikolai? What is left but your Cossack boots, the fur-lined cap, the foxes gathering by the river.
Tell us a story about that. Is because in the body of your work, I don't really know right now if Nikolai was a real person or if it's someone you made up.
Well, what happened was, and I think this happens to many people involved in the creative process, is that you experience something with somebody and then you create something out of something else and make it into something else. You know, when people say, don't make too much of this, well, that's what poets and writers do. They make so much out of absolutely nothing. So I had an English teacher friend from Stanford, and she told me that she really missed her brother who had passed. And when that happened, I started imagining what he was like in his name, which I really didn't know. And I didn't know the English teacher that well. She just started to coach me writing poetry in Boulder. And then I just really worked with that. I worked with the emotion of loss and having a brother that someone had lost and really developed the character from that. But as I said to you earlier in one of our conversations, I was off-Broadway actress for a while. And when I walked in for the part, and I read one part for Barbara Guest's play, and they said, oh, you've been acting in Shakespeare for years. And I said, no, I haven't. This is the first time I've ever tried this out. And then I went into the Peace Corps and never did anything again. But I wrote that poem as a part of a play, it feels like to me. And I'm fond of it because I'm so interested how a little incident, like someone saying, I lost a brother once, and then you go to sleep and you dream a poem. That's how it happened, really. So I don't know who Dmitri is. So
tell us about your process, because it's very interesting. So many people, when they write, especially people that aren't really writing poetry a lot. I think poetry has become an outlet for anguish for so many people. So
like country and western music.
Like country and western music, yeah. I lost my dog on the hill. Yeah, that kind of thing. So, but you have taken it somewhere different, where it's a way of life for you, but also you're exploring themes and situations that don't really exist except in the use of the poetry as a vehicle to explore a situation. And that is like, that's poetry on steroids. That's like this advanced way of approaching life and approaching writing through poetry that very few people, even people that practice the art, they never arrive at.
Well, I think what you said is very interesting, because you mentioned getting from one place to another, or a process. And I always think, when I start a poem, how can I get from A to B? And it reminds me of my grandfather. He used to stand on the edge of the lake and say, "I will teach you how to skip stones." And the art of stone skipping was something he worked at. And many people work at it with frisbees, or even throwing a paper airplane in school. But my grandfather, when he taught me this, it made me feel as if he was showing me something about how to leap from one stone to the other without falling back, and how to trust leaping into the unknown, which is the title of one of my books, because I felt that when I skipped with the stones and he watched how the water had the ripple effect, that was very important, to see how you can get from one place to another in the imagination without losing sight of where you think you're going. But the funny part is, you just don't know where you're going when you start writing. I never really know. I only have the title of the poem or a character, but I have no idea what's going to happen after that. And I think it's almost the idea of suspense. Since I don't know what's going to happen, maybe other people will wonder, what's going to happen next in that poem?
Now, you talked about how you don't really have an idea of what's going to happen. Some people would interpret that as, I'm just going to start and kind of go with the flow. And then on the more metaphysical slant, people would say, well, I'm just channeling. I'm opening up to the creative ether of the universe, and I'm allowing the statement to be made. Tell us about your process and how it applies to that.
Well, again, that process is interesting, because indigenous people really mock a lot of non-natives who say, I'm channeling God, goddess, I'm channeling whatever they want. And there are too many Napoleons to sit on the head of a pen. But with that being said, I really don't know what my process is. And I was telling my partner the other day, I said, I am aware of this, and this is the kind of thing I'm aware of. I'm aware of a cufflink, a tie, or a bouquet of flowers, a little tiny detail. And that tells me sometimes the imprint of somebody carrying an idea. But I can't necessarily say, gee, that's Uncle Charlie, or Aunt Martha. I try to make it a down-home experience as possible, because I think what happens, especially today, because of politics, art, and science, and history, and all the things that assail us in a very high-powered type of existence with cell phones and technology and so on, I think to relax into the poem and say, what do you have to tell me today? But it's not poetry on steroids. I'm a real nature's child, in that I really believe that the body and the mind and the spirit needs to be kept really, really pure. And I've always felt that. I don't know why I was born like that, but I was. I was surrounded by a lot of people who wanted to leave their bodies. And I could always leave mine effortlessly without assistance from any substance or any situation. I just could. And I think that was part of it, but I would never call it channeling or, gee, spirit of, as I said, my dead aunt takes over. So I kind of mock it and have a lot of self-mockery in my work because of it. I don't really know, Ron, what I believe in. I just like doing crossword puzzles I can't do them. I'd rather do poetry.
So the idea of where people are saying, well, okay, so if you're opening up and you're allowing whatever to flow through you to deliver the poem, but you're not channeling, people are going to they're going to challenge that. They're going to say, well, where's it coming from? So where is it coming from?
Well, exactly. And as I say, I could never say, and the people that challenge, I offer chess and swordplay and fencing and the Society for Creative Anachronism and polo and all kinds of wonderful strategic games that we have, because I really believe in more like the game of chance. There's one poem that begins, his name was Jack Chance. I think it was from Robinson, one of his poems. And so I believe more in games of chance, but not to make a philosophy out of it. More like, why do you write? One time my wonderful ballet teacher, Muriel Stewart, asked me, why do you dance? I said, because it's beautiful. So it's kind of like, why do you like gardening? I love gardening because, and then everybody makes a healing mantra out of an activity which is simply what it is. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's a state of being. Could you the beauty of the gardening or the beauty of the dance is not in thinking about doing it. It's not in having done it. It's in about being in the moment and experiencing it and being it. Does that resonate with you?
It does resonate.
And
it does
so
resonate.
What you're saying, that the act of creating the poem is a being in the moment kind of act too. Maybe one of the most perfect moments that we can attain. So do you find on an ongoing basis that obviously we all have to take care of the things we have to take care of to get by in life, and that is, of course, being in the moment as well. But do you find that do you live for those times when you're just completely in the essence of artistic expression?
No, but see, you framed it, and when you frame it, it goes away. I mean, that's the thing I'm always saying to my partner: don't frame this. It has no frame. It's limitless. It's expressionless. It's a well that never runs dry. It's a fire that can never be doused with water. It's a stream that continually flows. So I think the problem is when we try to define things. Again, with that being said, the art of definition is very important, because critics will come along and say, it took 45 books to figure out you're a playwright? And that's about where it's at. Because my joy is to see my lines performed on the stage by other people than me. And I think writing a poem is like keeping sacred company, almost, because you can dialogue with the spirit of what you're trying to say, but probably haven't found the words yet to say it. That's why I keep going.
One thing that I wanted to say to you, and why I'm having such a interesting time with you here over the last couple of days as we've been recording some of your poems, and I've taken the time to look at some of your work. There's so much there. A life lived, a life expressed. And in our society, especially in America, it's so easy that we just dismiss our elders, and we dismiss the lessons that they have, and we dismiss the magnitude of the lives they've lived. And when I look at that picture of you as a young girl leaping into the unknown, and then I see you sitting here, and then I see the giant body of work that you've created, it feels good to me to help to preserve that and pass some portion of it on to posterity. And I just think that there's something to be learned by looking at what people have left us and what has been said and spoken and lived and experienced, and that there's so much beauty and so much art that the world never sees, and that it's here for a blink of an eye and then it's gone. And I think that there was a reason that I was brought here to work with you and sit with you for a little while. So that being said, we're going to listen to another one of your poems.
Ode to a Patchwork Quilt. When you make a quilt, you have to intone prayers and chants to that quilt. You have to ask the following question. Is this quilt quite to your satisfaction? Will you swear by the tattered letters of the holy book of an alphabet that it has the places of all your mind mapped out and recorded in no time, no thought, no silk, nothing? I met a priest once in Dungannon, and he told me he would take a quilt to South America, but this quilt was full of spilt milk. For when he reached South America, there was an earthquake, and the quilt never reached the people in the village. Could you return all the pieces of that quilt to their source and not be disconcerted or disappointed? What of the krises and the holy stones that have created welts in the clans and in the silk and in the milk of kindness never given out and in the compassion of evening? The riveting of travelers growing by the number in their rooted homelessness and despair. Are you quite sure the quilt patterns and all the places it represents are evenly shown, fairly distributed in each circle, square and diamond patterns, limning in the quickening cants? There are fiddlers that keep talking, keep playing when there are no musicians present. There are quilts that gather up all the stitches and keep hanging when there are no gallows and no criminals to hang. Are the stone huts, the pariahs' outcast bivouacs and caverns quite to your pleasure? Or do you remain blind to the stitches that the thimbles on your thumbs create? Do the birds in the picture on the quilt chitter unceasingly in paradise, while mizzen stars, the horses you wove, stripped from torn pieces of red woolen petticoats, snicker as they swim near the edge of the cathedral moats? Does the needle stitching, ruffled trim beggar description for the design, or imitate root patterns in the same way a tree knows its rhyming roots? In the same way the artisan moves flowered metal trims on flat wagons and on caravans. I see the embroidery of your apron, the delicate spidery filigree needlework on your side purse, full of leaves and stars and mizzen stars and goats on the rooftops. Are these quite the same as the pattern left on the latticework of gates that tells the outsider which gentry's house, the house of the gaucho who will give the charity handful, or in which house will always turn the alms-seeking traveler away? Get away! Take your basket and your lace. Get away! Get away! Off with you! Each apron stitched has walked a talk story. Each kriss, each belt has a story. Each stone left at a crossword can be recalled to a place where all stone mounds sleep. Each stone voices a story of some accommodation, of fire, timbers going up in flames to banish any trace of death, in order to burn the last thread, the last wilderness of flesh, the last remnant of a life that's lived, or even voicing a yarn or a talk story about a traveler brood accomplishing the birth of a string of newborn foals. Maybe the quilt can tell the yarn of a different place where children have headed the lines of a decent crossing and trailing to the ghosted earth.
You know, listening to that, it's just another example of some moments of brilliance in the prose. But I have to ask you, of course, because of some of the things you've said. So is there a quilt? Was there a quilt?
Yeah, there was a quilt, and it came from, and I can't really pronounce it, but you're supposed to wrinkle your nose first, Hmong flower quilt, or a pandau. And these were the quilts made by the Laotian refugees that came to America, and they brought their art with them here after the Vietnam War, and I used to work with them, and this one lady made the most beautiful quilt I ever saw, and a priest was visiting from South America, and he said, I want to take that quilt back to the Inca people I work with. And that's how that happened. So yeah, it was based on something a little more rooted in time and space, that particular one. And the people that made it do pray as they make the quilts and as they make their soup and their broth. Whatever they're doing, they pray in all aspects of their life, as many indigenous peoples do. So that's more based on the truth than fantasy.
Out of all of the things that you could do with your time, why do you write poetry?
Well, that was a good question, because I said there's a physicality involved in writing poetry which is neglected, which is why I say I like to see it acted on the stage by some actors or actresses. It would mean a lot. Because I can't move about so much now that I'm old. So I would much rather be scuba diving, windsurfing, being on a horse, anything that's very physical, but I really can't do that right now. So I always think it's a temporal and temporary situation. But yeah, I'd rather be running in a marathon or whatever. And I think having been a dancer and having that training that began my life has always stayed with me, because I was born dancing and I was born a dancer first. But the interesting thing about all that was, while I was doing all this dance training, I also was reciting my poetry in St. Mark's in the Bowery in the Village in New York. And I grew up doing that, and I'm so glad I did, because I could draw on another talent, so to speak, or another pastime. I think it should be rightly called a pastime. And so that's what saves me now, because I think a lot of elderly people, if they can't move about and have nothing but memories to chide them in their elder years, they could become almost bored. And the reason I do my second doctorate right now, the reason I'm doing it is I don't want to get bored and crowding my mind with information which would seem perhaps really an issue for overcrowding of Malthusian proportions. It helps my poetry, because it makes me alert how to hop on and off the subway or how to problem solve. I kind of do that as a challenge, because you can become a couch potato when you're old. I mean, there's absolutely no reason not to say, I've worked hard all my life, and I have, so why not just sit there and relax? But I get bored so easily. So I'm probably ADD or something, but I really like to challenge my mind, and then all those thoughts from doing doctoral dissertations and work like that bring my poetry into a space where it can blossom. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I also notice that there's a bit of the trickster energy, a little cantankerous nature, a little bit of humor that's not readily apparent that weaves its way through the things that you write. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was never aware of being a trickster, but people always say, you're mischievous or something like that. And maybe that's so, but never to harm anyone, only to keep life interesting and light.
There's so many layers to what you're writing, and there's so many layers to how you portray it. And there's even the layer of, I just painted a complete image of a person who never really lived in a situation that never really happened.
Yep.
And it is so delivered so powerfully that I'm the only one who knows if nobody asks. So there's a certain amount of humor and witticism built into what you're doing. And so I'm not so much asking you if you're aware of being a trickster. I'm asking you if you're how much you actually weave that in intentionally, and how much of it you discover is just there as a result of the process that you used to write.
Yeah, but again, see, that's the will and intention. And, we're hung up on will and intention and manifestation, especially if you come from Sedona. You have to be aware of manifesting something. So I'm not really aware of it, but I find life is funny, and I just imitate what I see. So I don't really think, gee, I think I'll put in a line here. But I love to watch stand-up comedians, and I think Robin Williams was truly the greatest contribution American culture has for a long time. And that informs my work, that I don't think we should take life so seriously. And also, Native American humor. If you try that on someone who doesn't know about it, they'll go, that isn't funny. But it is very funny. It's all the ethnicity and humor is so varied. We just have to learn how to understand one another through humor. I think humor is an international language like music.
Now, you've had a very metaphysical life, and you live your life guided by very pure, very esoteric principles compared to the status quo, especially here in America. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you feel about the world we live in today.
See, I don't know how to answer that question either, because I think the first problem is comparing. The first it starts in school with, she got an A and I only got a B, and maybe I'm only a C or a D student, really. So I really don't know how to answer your question in terms of who are you really. I think in asking that question of the other, I'm exploring who I am, in that everything is a reflection. Everything we see, every person we meet is a reflection of what we're choosing to look at in that sense. But as to asking that question, I don't know how to answer it. Not really.
Now, is writing poetry an exploration of that question?
Yeah,
it's an
that's
exploration
exactly
for you.
Exactly, you got it. That's what I think it really is. I have a funny poem called "Some People Got It, Some People Get It Getting on a Bus, and some people get it getting off a bus, and some people get it accepting a bouquet of flowers, and some people get it when they have their picture taken, and some people get it, And then at the end of the poem, it asks the question, who really got it? And that's how I am. I'm still searching, Ron. And what keeps me alive is the search, the pilgrimage of the search. I will admit I want to do the Camino walk because it's the last possible thing I could probably do. So I just kind of want to do it. I like challenge, and I think when I hear about people that are blind on skateboards or surfing, windsurfing, or surfing the waves, it's amazing what people can do. So I just think it's a challenge. Life is a challenge, and you can take it how you want.
As I peruse your poetry, what do you hope I'll find?
I hope you'll be amused, and I hope you'll hear a response in yourself. I don't know how to say that you'll hear a response in yourself, but I hope it gives you something to think about. I think reading dry philosophy is incredibly challenging, and reading a poem about a philosophical tract might be less challenging. But yeah, I hope you find something that just awakens your spirit and makes you laugh and makes you glad to be alive, and see that gratitude is all we've got, because the body is a momentary blessing, like you said those words.
So as I'm perusing one of your books, am I finding wisdom? Am I finding companionship in someone else who asks the same questions I ask? What am I finding?
That's what I think. You said it. I think you said that's what you're finding, the companionship of words, and words are only words. But even the dancers have to give up their careers at a certain time, many of them. Some don't, really. And so you realize the transitory nature of life. that's when you start to think life is such a gift, every moment, because you know from your experiences with Martin Gray what happens. Suddenly something can change everything in your picture. And I think poetry tries to do something like that. Change everything in your picture by turning it upside down in some way and saying, wait a minute, there's one poem I know, like, why didn't I think of that before? That's kind of the poet's unlettered verse. You know, why didn't I think of that before? Why didn't I write that poem before? And so on. And so if it makes you feel like, why didn't I think of that before? Maybe that's all. Maybe just the smell of perfume in the air or whatever. It's each to what they want to see or want to hear or want to learn. Because I never wanted to be a teacher. I never wanted to be a poet. I never wanted to be a dancer. In fact, I didn't want to come into this life at all. And here I am.
What do you know?
That's even getting worse. Oh, you're challenging me. How do I answer this? What do I know is just to be.
And the work that you've put out is an expression of that, isn't it?
I guess, but as I say, it could be just a book addiction. I really don't know. I love books.
Well, we've covered a couple of angles and elements here, and one of them that you're very animate about is that as you're creating, you're in the moment and you're experiencing being.
Mm-hmm.
And so to just be, this body of work is your result of being.
Yeah, I mean, it may be and it may not be, because there are many people who sit in meditation, and when they were questioned about this is interesting, Ron, when they were questioned about this, it's why do you sit in meditation all day? You know, you swamis on the mountaintops.
Right.
You know what they answered? They answered there'd be no world for you to ask that question in if we weren't doing this. I mean, the philosophers have the last word on that, but poets may not. I'm not sure.
Well, you have religion, philosophy, poetry, and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, how do they fuse? Or do they ever really come together into one common place?
I think Shakespeare's the one that made it all come together.
So there's a certain amount of drama, a certain amount of whispering questions that live in your poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Do you live in your poetry?
No, that's what I was trying to say. I think that's why I make light of it a lot, because I really don't. Like when people say, you know, on page 6 in this book, you know, I'm very separate from my poetry. And that, I mean, I think that's a blessing too, because to live within the pages of your books, and I see, you know, a lot of academics have to do that because mm-hmm. they don't have any escape valves kind of thing.
You know, I think I've noticed a distinction in a couple of your answers, and I want to ask you. So when I asked if, you know, do you live in your poetry? Do you
Mm-hmm.
live in the things that you've written?
Mm-hmm.
And you're distinctly, well, no, I'm separate from that. But
Yeah.
then the act of creating the poetry in where you're finding your ultimate being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as though you live in the creation of the work, but you don't live in having created the work.
Exactly. I think that's a perfect observation, because in the act of creation, there's joy. After the poem is written, it's just a piece of paper.
So when I know that you said that a lot of the process of doing the work that you do is from being in the moment, and it comes spontaneously, and that you start with just a very basic thing. But when you took the story of your mom having seen the fox, mm-hmm. did you have any idea where you were going to go with that?
No, I just had a scrap of paper with her writing on it, and she's a beautiful calligrapher. All her letters were in beautifully shaped letters. And I just looked at this letter and I read the sentence, and voila, the poem was born. I didn't think, gee, you know, I'm going to make a poem out of it. I always think about the intention. I don't have an intention, because an intention frames too much and says,
sure.
you know, like, I'm going to do this thing,
But
because
certainly there's lines in this poem that are designed to resonate, rather by thinking that I want to write a line that resonates, or just allowing it to come through and you're successful creating a line that resonates. There's several lines in this poem that resonate with people and their relationships with their mothers. And so as listening to it, it's just so hard to believe that it was just an off-the-cuff idea from a fictionalized situation, and all of a sudden you just wrote this thing in a half trance, and then turned out this poem that actually succeeds in having gravity.
But if it succeeds in having gravity, that's quite by chance. But what you said about that's all you did and that's what happened is true. That's what's so interesting about the imagination and the world of Maya illusion and so on, you know.
So you said earlier that you publish yourself as Elizabeth Martina Bishop so that you're not confused with the Canadian poet Elizabeth Bishop.
Yeah.
And you obviously have a great reverence for her. Can you tell us, was she a key inspiration for you?
Not really until people started telling me about her. They said, you know, your name, your name, your name. So I went up to Nova Scotia and I sat in her pew. And she died in '64. And I read many of her works and so on. And she's a great inspiration. Now that's a conscious act of inspiration. But when my name became what it is, I wasn't aware. And I had one person who was very sternly told me, you're going to have to change your name. So the first book I ever wrote, I did change my name. And nobody knows that I wrote that book either. So it wasn't such a great idea to change my name. I feel happy with it. I feel, since I visited her pew in the church, she's happy that I share her name in a certain kind of a way, just tentatively, of course. So that is something conscious now in my older years than when I went up there and said, I don't know what I'm looking for, and who is this poet anyway? They keep saying you have the same name as, you know. But it's really nice when you go somewhere and somebody says, oh, I've read your works. And I go, no, you haven't. No, you haven't.
Would you like to leave us with a profound, spontaneous moment of poetic bliss?
You mean like before I lay my favorite jewels out on the table, speak to me and tell me why I'm sorry, if you are able?
Beautiful. Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron, for your time. It was a delightful experience talking with you. Really delightful.